Pledge of Allegiance, and then I will ask that everybody remain standing. I'm going to ask our two youngest visitors, the DeWitt children, Chris DeWitt's kids, to come on forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, okay? And thank you for joining us tonight. Go right ahead, guys.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Well done. You guys must take after your mom. I'm going to ask everybody to remain standing for a second. In the last month, Superintendent of Schools David Title and his wife lost one of their children who passed away. Jack Title. I had the opportunity to know Jack. He was a very special young man. And I know if David was here, he would say, hey, they're not alone. And it's always very difficult when a parent loses a child. So I thought tonight, while we hold a moment of silence for them, we also think of all the Fairfield residents who in the past year might have also lost a child, which is probably the most difficult thing in life. So I'd ask for a moment of silence. Thank you very much. And our thoughts and prayers are with the Titles and the other families who suffered such a loss. Tonight we have 4 items on the agenda. The most pertinent one, or the one with the most public interest tonight, is to consider and act upon the mill rate for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2014 and ending June 30th, 2015. And obviously this is the culmination of all the hard work and effort that's gone in throughout the administration and all the town boards for the last several months. Item number 2 is to appoint the auditors to conduct an audit of the town's financial records for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2014. That is the current fiscal year, and we'll hear from Mrs. Mary LeClaire and our audit subcommittee on that. Item number 3, and this is a new item that we put in place a couple of years ago, which is to appoint, or in this instance, our hope to reappoint, the clerk of the Board of Finance for the next year, ending in May 2015. And then the last item will be to approve minutes from many of our budget hearings that took place in February and March. At this point, do we have any questions, comments, or concerns from any board members? All right, seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mayor, who's put together a rather lengthy and detailed presentation for us on setting the mill rate for the upcoming fiscal year. So please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will just start going through what the package. The intent of this package is to show where we started, where we've ended up, and then since the budget season starts in, I don't even know when it starts. November, maybe? September. Things change. Not everything is reflected in the end budget, so there's other considerations that the Board of Finance may want to take into consideration when it determines the mill rate. So we'll go through those considerations that we've identified in the Finance Department. And then we'll show the impact of the various amounts on the town homeowners, both the median and the average homeowner, based upon different mill rate changes.
Please speak into the mic, Mr. Mayor. We're losing you.
So the Schedule A is the RTM approved budget based upon the preliminary Board of Assessment net grand list as voted on, I guess I started to say Monday, but I guess it was Tuesday, wasn't it? Tuesday morning. They approved expenditure budget of $285 million approximately. Now, with the preliminary net grand list, that brought us to a percent mill rate change of 1.96%. That's from fiscal year 14 mill rate of 23.93 to a fiscal year 15 mill rate of 24.4. So then updating the grand list with the changes that were made by the Board of Assessment Appeals. Backing up one step, the collection rate used in the initial budget preparation was 98.71.
98.71,
98.71,
and where,
right.
and
I'll-
that's remained constant between the preliminary and the next page, which is your proposed final.
Yes, yes.
Okay, with,
The difference between the budget approved, the 1.96 and what's Schedule B.
forget, don't go there yet.
Okay.
Just let's answer this question. You have not changed at all from the first time we looked at the budget until now, the collection rate on the tax levy.
Correct.
And that collection rate is
98.71.
98.71. How does that compare? What was the collection rate budgeted for this fiscal year?
98.75?
98.75. Okay, so we're down a little bit from this fiscal year. Is that correct?
Yes, we can get into that later or now, whichever
No,
you
that's
prefer.
fine. I just wanted to clarify that point because I know we will have questions on that. Okay,
You might need me to pull some papers out here.
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I totally forgot about. Right. So, however, because of the adjustments to the grand list by the Board of Assessment Appeals, which reduced the grand list by about $9 million, the 1.96, the impact of that reduction in the grand list changes the 1.96 to 2.05 and a required mill rate at the consistent 98.71% collection rate to 24.42.
So every other adjustment has remained constant from the preliminary.
Yes, the state and
final
elderly
one.
disabled, the senior state tax relief, the assessment appeals, everything else has remained constant.
Okay. But what's happened is the assessment has been dropped by the assessment value. The
Correct.
grand list value of the town has been dropped based on actions of the Board of Assessment Appeals by $9 million.
Yeah, 9 million, do you know the exact number, Linda? It's 9 million something. I think.
Like 9,000,004 is the calculation.
Yeah.
Does
It's
does that
pretty darn,
change the reserve for uncollected as well?
How does,
no, that's separate.
Oh.
This is just the grand list has dropped by $9.4
Because that is different
million.
between these two as well.
Well, because the gross is different, using the same percentage, the reserve will be different
That's
as well.
my point. You
Yeah.
collect that from the gross.
Right.
Oh,
And the
okay.
gross has
That's what I meant.
changed.
The reserve is
Yes.
collected, is just calculated.
Yes.
Because it's
Yes.
the reserve is a calculation of the grand list, right?
Mr. Walsh was correct, 9,450,000.
Yep.
that's a 90.45% increase.
I'm sorry, what?
That's a 90.45%, well, decrease, but the amount of money that from what was budgeted.
It reduces our revenue by about $229,000 or something like that.
Where you get it, what are you saying, Jim? I'm not
Well,
following.
I'm looking on page C. And if you compare year to year, what the BAA adjustments were for, towards the bottom,
Why don't we let him walk us through it?
Okay.
Yeah, let's walk through it, just so we can all follow. Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, back to you. The difference between Schedule A and Schedule B is the assessed value of the grand list, and to Mr. DeWitt's point, the calculation of the reserve for uncollectible
Correct.
accounts.
Same percentage used for the calculation, but because the gross is now less, the reserve is now less as well.
Right, so the grand list has been adjusted downwards by $9,450,000 based on actions of the Board of Assessment Appeals.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah, $9,358,083 as Schedule C shows.
okay. Go ahead.
Do we have a list of what those changes were?
The assessor does.
Do we have one here tonight?
No.
Were they commercial properties or residential properties?
I do not know. I would imagine the bulk. I don't know. There was
What was
147 properties that applied. 127 of them were either approved or not approved, but handled. And
Were one or more of these properties large adjustments, like
I-
$1 million or $2 million adjustments?
It does not impact the revenue collection.
No, that's not what he's
That's not-
asking.
that's what
but
I'm
let's-
asking.
I know, I'm just saying, but I don't know the answer. I already said that.
Okay, it just seems
I have not examined, the Board of Assessment Appeals has the responsibility to evaluate appeals. They make their decisions. I take their information. I fold it into the calculations.
When did we have those numbers?
The Board of Assessment Appeals numbers was first, I think, middle to end of March. March 26th.
Okay, it seems to me as though if that's going to affect everything and going to affect what the mill rate is, that maybe the board should be supplied with those numbers when the variances are so large, because if we're trying to get to a certain tax rate or tax increase, it might be helpful to have that so that we could take that into account when we're going through the budget.
Yeah, I know that and I don't know, I'm going to say, I don't know. I believe the First Selectman had conversations with various members of town bodies, but I can't speak to that specifically.
He had conversations with our body?
I don't know.
I don't remember a conversation with the
I
Board of
said
Finance.
various members of town bodies.
Okay. Is he going to be here this evening?
He's at the Fire Commission meeting this evening.
He's not going to be here this evening?
I don't know when that meeting will be over.
He did alert me on Monday evening that he had a conflict with a very important fire commission meeting tonight. He pulled me aside during the RTM meeting and alerted me to that. But he said he had full confidence in Mr. Mayor to walk us through this. So go ahead. Let's go back to Schedule C, and then we'll come back, because I just want to hear the explanation here.
The explanation.
Well, walk us down this schedule, please.
Okay. So basically, the current year expenditures, well, just going down fiscal year 15 budget line item, the center column, the town budget increases by 1.55%. I guess that's not actually the middle column, is it? That's the far right column. The Board of Education budget of $155,718,000 is an increase of $4,526,000, or about 2.99%, for a total combined increase of 2.33%. Non-tax revenue, which is fees and state government revenue primarily, is increased by 1%. For net current year revenue required before credits and reserves of $259,539. That is a 2.61% increase over the prior year. Credits to the gross reserve, the gross revenue, are senior and disabled tax credits, which is in here at $4,255,000, which is less than last year's budgeted amount. And we'll go into that a little later as well. Senior disabled tax credits from the state there. Oh, back up to the 4255. That was based upon last year's actual plus 500,000 that was potentially anticipated to come in through the new deferral program. Not much came in through the new deferral program, but we did have a significant increase in credit activity, and we'll go through some detail on that later. The senior and disabled tax credits from the state, that's not an estimate. That's pretty solid. And then the overpayment credits is a combination of potential future Board of Assessment appeals, because getting back to Mr. Walsh's questions, the grand list is a very fluid document. It changes, I won't say daily, but it changes, I don't know, weekly, monthly, because there's always credits, not always. There's the consistent activity going on with the appeals. So it changes throughout the year. Then we have the reserve for collecting on taxes, which is, as we indicated earlier, in 14 was 98.75. This year we used 98.71. We'll talk about that. And so that gives us a total revenue required of $268 million, or revenue increase of 2.28%. The bottom half of the calculation is basically the mill rate and tax rate calculation. Starts out with the the assessor's grand list total gross $12,098 million, which is reduced by tax exempt properties, state mandated residential exceptions, and when it says final BA adjustments, that's the final Board of Assessment Appeals adjustments, but there are continuing adjustments through further negotiated actions and legal actions that take place. So final is not really a correct word, but it's final. It's just not the right word, but that's what people call it. And then we have the supplemental motor tax as an estimate. I think we missed that last year. We were I forget what it actually came in at, but we increased the actual of 14 by I think 5%. So that is 5%. That number becomes known in October, and the number in the 15 budget is 5% higher than the actual number that we for 14, which was distributed by the state in October of 2014. And then that gives us a mill rate of 24.42 for a tax rate increase of 2.05. And if you look in the far right column, you see if you go to the top bold number, we have an expenditure increase of 2.33. And then if you come down to the bottom section here, the grand list increase was 0.22%. So that reduces the required revenue 0.33, and we end up with and the other changes, minor changes, you end up with a mill rate increase of 2.05%.
Okay, let's stick to questions on this document first, and then we'll come back to our questions about the assessment appeals issues, okay?
Now,
Hang on, Mr. Mayor, just for
Sorry.
a second. Does anybody have questions on this specific page? Mrs. Leclerc?
I'm a little bit confused on the supplemental motor vehicle. Sorry. On the supplemental motor vehicle, shouldn't that line have changed between the 2014 budget and the 2015 budget?
No, what I said was the number that we booked last year, we overestimated. We did a lot of work on that number last year. We looked at auto sales, did all kinds of things, but we pulled, we picked a number. That number came in. The actual is given to us in October.
Right, it's
Okay.
based on October.
Right, and we missed it by about 5%. So basically, we increased last year's number by 5. We increased the actual number by 5%, and we just basically used last year's number.
For this year.
For this year.
As an
Hoping to catch up
approximation.
with ourselves.
Okay,
Are you good, Mrs. Leclerc?
I guess so.
I mean, we could pick a different number.
Right, no, because I just understood that number changed every year, the
We don't know
regular-
what it is, though.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
this is an estimate.
They overestimated last year, and you're just
Right.
using the same number to compensate.
Right,
basically.
trying to, just,
You outsmarted yourselves last year in trying to calculate.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Any other
put way
questions
too much
on
work
this
into that.
page of the document? All right, Mr. Mayor, go to the next page.
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, and then we'll come back.
So, once again, this page shows that the BAA adjustments from fiscal year 14 to the fiscal year 15 have increased by 90.45%.
Yes.
Yeah, last year the BA adjustments were 10 million, this year they were 19 million. That is the correct statement.
Okay, where would they been gone historically before this? I mean, how big are the fluctuations normally? Are they normally 90%? Do they go up and down more than 90%? It just seems like an abnormal amount.
Given that this is the third year of since the revaluation, I was expecting a lower number. I was also actually, though, anticipating some other court activity because there's still some court cases outstanding. So I was actually also anticipating some additional court activity, but none of that has been resolved. We have some information on that. It's not major, but
Said another
but
way.
going into.
Said another way, what surprises me is that you would expect that maybe if there was an assessment completed several years ago now, you would expect, in terms of the Board of Assessment Appeals, the trajectory to be more adjustments in the early year and less adjustments as you went further on.
Correct. Less applications,
Right.
and therefore
So
less
you would expect
adjustments.
the largest adjustment, should there
Right.
be adjustments, would be in the first year, then less in the second year, and then much smaller in the third year. Correct? I want to get, what are you guys looking at?
She has some actual dollar information, but I think the number of appeals,
What's the actual dollar information?
I can't read that, I don't even know. Wait a second. This is their adjustments? Oh, okay, then, so last year it was the 10 million, the year before that it was 8 million, the year before that it was 25 million, the year before that, that was the revalve year, that's the one you would expect the bigger number. The year before that it was 3, 6, 9, 5, 21 million in the
So we
years
went
prior.
from 25 mil, so we had a reval, and in the first year after the reval, we had 25 million adjustment. The
Correct.
second year, we had a $10 million adjustment.
8 million.
8,123,000.
And then the third year, we're having 19 million?
No, 10. Now we're back
10,
up to
10,
19.
19. So we're 4 years out, and our trend line went the wrong way.
Right.
Well, Mrs. Leclerc was first, so go right ahead. And I'll go
Are
back to
any
you.
of these related to like tear downs from Sandy? And then when they get rebuilt, they'll go back up?
A tear down from Sandy could be, for a revaluation to be approved, it has to be one of two things. It has to either be a total demolition, which would be a tear down, or an error made as of the date of the revaluation. So if someone's property was diminished as a result of Sandy, that would not qualify, but if it was a complete tear down, it would qualify.
Okay, Mrs. Leclerc? I'm going to go to microphone,
It's a
please.
really simple question. Do you know approximately how long it takes for a assessment to work its way through the system and eventually get adjudicated by the committee?
What happens is the,
Well, Mrs.
grand-
Leclerc served on it, correct? Didn't you years
Oh,
ago?
then
So
we'll-
just explain it real quick.
Yeah, it's really a 3-week process. You file an application, there's 3 weeks of hearings, you go one day, present your case, and it's decided.
well, no, it's decided, and then those that the appeal board denies then go into, the person either walks away or files a case. And in those cases, we still have cases outstanding from the initial appeal year, actually. So we have cases that have been in consideration for 3 years.
Right, but the only thing I was trying to get at was because I think the question that seems to be on everybody's mind is why several years out from the valuation when we have this big bump. I just thought it might be a much longer process, and that's why, but it apparently is exactly.
No, I was very surprised. My initial numbers there when I first put this together were,
Mrs. Leclerc, we'll go back to you, and then we'll go to Mr. Walsh again.
I'm wondering if you could get us some kind of data on how many new appeals were filed this year? versus-
147 this
Okay.
year, and last year was 131?
Okay.
Was it more this year? Yeah,
And then
Yeah.
how many cases were settled, like legal cases?
112. Well, how many, I don't have the data on, I mean, legal cases are settled all year long.
Right, but wouldn't they affect the grand list now?
Right,
The change?
right, but those get flowed into the grand list. You know, there's constant adjustments to the grand list during the year
This is just the adjustment based on the actions of that board.
of the board.
So this is not related to any legal case settlings.
This specific line item, that is correct. The actions to the board that we anticipate from a legal perspective are in the, under credits, included in the overpayments and credits line.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Well, it seems like we've got to get some type of analysis on how this all happened, because, last year we had, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, we had 131 appeals?
123 last year, 129 this year.
Oh, there's 129, not 147?
That's
Okay,
correct.
so there's 123 last year, and we have a net adjustment of $10 million. We have now 129, so just 6 additional ones, and we increase it by $10 million, approximately, 9.4, $9
Yeah,
million.
I mean, the only difference that I can speak to is there was an election, and it's a different appeals board.
So the new appeals
I think,
board
and I don't know if
is-
people got
is
reelected or not. I
that
just-
much more generous, or?
I mean,
There's several
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't, I mean, I don't,
Yeah, no, I know, but there's several factors here, right? Fine, what you just said, maybe, I'm not going to go there.
yeah, I mean,
But there could be, to your earlier question, the mix of commercial versus residential.
Yeah.
There's obviously the mix of dollar value of the properties.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to Mrs. Leclerc's earlier question, there's the whole commentary regarding Sandy and whether there were complete losses that are, and they would be reflected in this number.
correct.
Well, I think we need
I
I
agree.
think this board needs a full analysis on what just happened.
I agree.
We need a full analysis on how it happened, what the percentage of commercial was, where were the large drivers of this change. Because it is now adjusting the tax rate by 0.1%. I mean, it's going from 1.95 tax increase to 2.05. But the town bodies, when we were voting on the budgets, when we could have controlled things, didn't really know that. And if that's going to be happening again, I think we need to know it. I also think that the question comes up is, why weren't we told about this in March when we all could have done something about it? So
Was
I'd
the
like to-
actual number known in March?
They completed the work March 26. We got the number, following week.
So the following week was right at the time we were voting? Is that, is that correct? Because we voted on what, March 30th? Or
April.
April?
3rd or something.
April 2nd or 3rd. So it was right around the same time we were voting. Okay. Let me give the benefit of the doubt there, right? Just because I don't know the exact timing. It clearly would have been available, though, for the RTM to have known
It
that.
clearly was available, yes, sir.
I just think with such a large variance, the town bodies have got to know that number so we can take that into account. So I really want to know when the timing was. I'd like you to get back to us when the administration knew that number, and whether the Board of Finance could have had it before we voted to know about such a large variance, and obviously when the RTM could have had it. And I don't know, I think that we, as the Board of Finance, need to get a hold of why this variance was so, to me, seems out of whack from one year to the next, when we go from basically just 6 more appeals from one year to the next, but yet the total amount that the BAA adjustments are $9.4 million more, almost double. Why are they going up so drastically?
I certainly agree that an estimate, or rather not an estimate, an explanation for that is absolutely appropriate, and I too would like to do that. I'm not going to make a comment on whether it was justified or not justified at this point, because I don't understand the fact pattern yet.
I don't know what the justification either.
Right.
These could be large commercial properties. I mean,
It
this
could be
entire
Sandy related, could be commercial
this
properties.
entire number variance could be one large commercial property.
A heck of a commercial property.
It could be GE. It could be somebody. I don't know, but it could be something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to agree with you, Jim, but also make one amendment to it, if I could, is that I think it should be clear, though, we all work collegially across boards here.
Sure.
I don't think anybody, including you, is trying to imply that there was anything done wrong or.
Well, I've not said that at
Right,
all.
okay, I just
Oh,
want to make sure.
I
yeah.
100% don't
it's-
think that anything happened.
Right, I
that-
think it goes
that-
without saying that it would be useful for us if we could know that number before we vote or the RTM votes, without question. I mean, it's obviously a meaningful number. But, I mean, that's what the Board of Assessment Appeals does, and like Tom was saying, there's 100 different reasons why the numbers could be big or small.
Just want to know why.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I concur with both of you.
And especially as we're heading into a reval, I think we need to know that stuff.
Does our tax collectors here, I know our assessor's not, which, quite frankly, with this number, I'm surprised that we didn't ask our assessor to be here tonight. And let's be clear, we didn't see this number until we got this document an hour ago, 2 hours ago. So we didn't know this walking in here. So it would have been beneficial to have the assessor here tonight. So, but does our tax collector, you have any details on this? That you can share with us, please?
Hi.
And we know you don't manage this process, we just want to know, what you know about this, given it had to come to your office, right?
No, it has not come to my office because it does not affect the 2012 grand list that I am collecting right now.
Oh, so you have you seen these list of properties, though, yet?
No, I have not, but I will tell you, because people come to our office with building permit stuff, we have had some demolition permits come through, checking to see if the taxes were paid.
So what does that imply? Take that to its logical conclusion.
We do know, just from my speaking with the people, the builders or the contractors that are coming in, that they are for total demolitions caused by Sandy.
And what are the questions you're getting? You're getting questions on, have the taxes been paid on these
Correct.
properties before demolition takes place?
Correct. Right, they come to our office to see.
Who's
lots of
they?
times,
I'm sorry, who's they?
either the contractor or whoever is taking out the permit. Usually it's a contractor.
Okay,
It comes in.
forgive my ignorance on this
That's okay.
point, and maybe we're all ignorant, but I'll just plead my ignorance. Before you demo something in this town, you need to make sure you paid all your taxes on it, and then you can demo it? Is that what's being implied?
It's kind of like a building permit, Tom.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it's kind of like a building permit. So before we give any type of building permit, we make
Yep.
sure everyone's taxes are paid. That's
Right.
just, so I think the same thing happens with a demolition permit, is that
Really?
you need to make, I think that's the case. I'm not positive.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask Cinda.
I'm just not,
but
I knew that about building, I
Yeah.
did not know that about demo.
It kind of makes sense, because you're asking, the thought process is that you're asking the municipality to give you something.
Yes.
So to be able to have you change a property. And I think the thought process is, well, before we agree to do that, we should make sure your taxes are paid. And I just know that from both commercial clients and whatever. It's one of the checks in the process where I have to bring, sometimes on my commercial property, something around to Cinda to make sure that they've paid their taxes prior to getting the right to change that property around.
And if the taxes are not paid, what we do is give them the information so that they can be paid.
Can pay it, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so you've had a bunch of activity of people, of contractors coming in with requests for demo permits, and they've checked whether taxes have been paid.
Well, I won't say I can't give you a number, and most of the time I'm in my office, but
Understand?
I have noticed that there are those kind of permits being asked where we usually have not gotten those in the past.
Okay. And your understanding is based on those permits and things, these are due to Sandy-related properties.
The contractors that I have talked to, yes, they're looking to remove the demolition, do the demolition as soon as possible to have it removed so that there then can be the new cycle of rebuild or growth.
Got it.
And I'm just I've had similar clients who are going through the same process, and with many of the houses in the Beach District, because people have gotten some of the state funding and things like that to raise their houses to the current flood levels, people are just going for full demolitions. Either they've been completely demolished or they've gotten their money out of FEMA finally, because it's taken several years of negotiations with many of these people who've lived down in the beach area, so they haven't been able to do what they wanted to do because they're in fights with FEMA, whether they get the maximum amount or some negotiated amount. So it's taken a while, but some of that work is now happening.
Okay, because thank you, Mr. Walsh, and thank you, Cindy. What I was just given was the beauty of technology. It's an electronic copy of the minutes, and who got this? Mary, for, she's fantastic. Board of Assessment Appeals, March 20th, South Pine Creek, Fairfield Beach, Fairfield Beach, Fairfield Beach, Fairfield Beach, Reef Road, Fairfield Beach, Penfield, Fairfield Beach, Fern Street, Fairfield Beach, Birch Street, Fairfield Beach, Fairfield Beach. I think there's your answer. Fairfield Beach, Beach. So there you go. A lot of tear downs. On March 20th.
Now,
And
there'll
that-
be supplemental bills for some of these people that will be coming in, because if they get their house torn down and then they hopefully get them built this summer, and they'll be up, Cindy, won't there be some type of supplemental bill that will come in if the building is done and they get a CO and all that other stuff?
Okay, the way that works is they are going to get a tax bill for what was on the property as of October 1st of 2013. Then, if they've gone to the BAA and they've gotten that, so that that has been reduced because they're going to demolition, then their tax bill will be for just the property. When they do get a CO,
Yeah.
that is when they'll get a supplemental bill for the real estate that is built. But in between times, they will not. They will pay for the property, and then once the CO is completed. So if that is between October 1st and September 30th of 2014, there will be an additional bill for the 2013 grand list.
So the interesting part of this is this goes back to a discussion that I remember having right after Sandy and right after we knew there was a lot of damage, talking about what the process was and how people, I mean, we had a long discussion about this. What we're seeing now is the tail end of that coming through, I hope the tail end coming through, and what the ramifications of all these issues were. What we did not know, to Mr. Walsh's point, was at the time we were voting, what the dollar amount was or what the impact was. Now, giving the benefit of the doubt because of the timing of this, maybe that wasn't known specifically for when we voted, but it certainly should have been and would have been available for when the RTM voted just a couple of nights ago. Correct?
Correct.
And you would have had this number, when was the first time you would have known, do you think, about this?
I received a number like late March, early April. I informed the administration.
Okay. Okay.
And what's also interesting is the lasting effects of Storm Sandy, because based on those, if the analysis shows that the majority of these properties were caused by Storm Sandy and people going through the process, what it really shows is that the rest of the town for this given year is going to have an increase of taxes for the lack of tax revenue. So really, the entire town is going to be paying for Storm Sandy this coming year to some degree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Linda's amazing.
So a year
her
later, it
documentation.
comes back.
Hang on just a sec, go ahead.
I said, a year later, it comes back.
Well,
So if-
it
so
gets come
Mr.
back when it
Cinda's-
gets built.
Right, so much to Cinda's point, if it's, I don't know what the cutoff is, said October 1st. If you assess it on October 2nd, it's a blank lot, it's less. If you assessed it on September 30th, you got assessed at a full house. Because we've had this discussion here before. If you get assessed on, if you knock down the house the day after you're assessed, right, and you rebuild it before the next assessment, your taxes never change if the value of the house is the same. If you just happen to knock it down or have it cleared during the initial assessment, it'll go down. So that somebody's making a claim that 100, and whatever the number was, 147 properties,
127.
sorry, 127, houses will no longer exist there during that initial assessment period, but we don't know when they're coming back.
But to Cinda's point, when they do build, whenever that is,
It comes back.
they'll get a supplemental. But for this period of time,
Right.
they're not paying on something that's not there. And to Mr. Walsh's point, during that period of time, whether it be 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, the rest of the town is picking up
It's true.
The lost revenue.
the lost revenue.
True.
Well, certainly in the supplemental bill that will take place will only be from the date of the certificate of occupancy.
Exactly.
So all of the time between the tear
That was my
down
point.
and the occupation of the building will be lost.
Thank you. I think Mr. Mayor wanted to say something, then I'll go to Mrs. Albin, then I'll go over to Mr. Becker.
Yeah, two things. One, we received the information, I guess the vote was towards the end of March, and I guess it takes time for the information to be processed through the system. The email to the Finance Department from the Assessor's Office was April 8th, 1:39 PM,
So that was after our vote.
after your vote. Yeah.
Got it. So again,
So that was
Which
after our,
goes to the benefit
after
of
our,
the doubt that I was
my
saying.
and the Board of Finance's interaction regarding the budget.
right. So it was after that, but certainly with that type of time frame, has this topic come up at all with the RTM?
Not to my, not from me or with me,
Okay.
or by me.
All right. I'm going to go to Mrs. Albin, and then I'll go to Mr. Becker. Thank you for the additional information. Mrs. Albin, and then Mr. Becker.
I hear Mr. Walsh's concerns and agree with them as well. And somewhere in the budget process, it would be helpful to know what is going on at the Board of Assessment of Appeals. So I believe that would be a valuable thing. A question through the chair to Mr. Mayor. So dollars and cents that has to be, that we will not be able to rely on, that we have to tax for, again, is 9 million.
Well, I mean, the decrease by the Board of Assessment Appeals was $9,348,083.
So that's revenue that we have to make that up.
No,
in-
not the revenue, that's the assessment.
Right.
That's the
but-
assessed value.
But it requires that we make up for that decreased
Like
value.
226,000, I think.
How
the
much?
number. 226,000.
Okay. So that number, which then brought up the anticipated tax increase of 1.96, along with some other circumstances, to the, what number?
2.05.
0.05, 200 and X thousand dollars. What would that increased payment be for an average taxpayer? Can you do that math? Can Linda do that math?
It's $5. It's $45.
$45?
Wait, no,
No,
it's-
more like
To be-
12 or 13.
wait a second.
If you do 22,000.
It's like 22, because the BOE cut, they said it was 45.
Oh, it's 5 per 100,000, right. I'm sorry, I had a different number.
Like 11 or 12.
It's $5 per 100,000, so that's $12.
On average, too. So, and also, when these new homes are built and they do go on the grant-
$9.
Pardon me?
$9.
$9, okay. When these new homes are built and they're added to the grand list, they are likely to come back on the grand list at a greater value than they exited at
That would be my anticipation.
because of the cost of construction.
Yes.
And they're not going to build that exact same house. They're going to,
People who can't afford to build would have sold to
they will
somebody who
sell the
can.
property, unfortunately, for them. And sometimes I've heard a few people that that's actually been the better deal for them. They made more money. But, so, in time, The houses that replace what were there are going to come in at a higher assessed value, growing the grand list. But we're going to have to wait for that to happen. And also, nothing is stagnant. So at the same time that's happening, we're going to have other things happening in the town that's going to affect the bottom line. We can't make everything that goes on in town freeze so that from year to year we can get an absolutely perfect picture, because the parts are all moving in different directions at all times. We don't know who's going to decide to buy a large property in Greenfield Hill and tear the house down. We just don't know that information. And so, and I've seen that happen too. But I just think that the information would be helpful as we go through the process. I feel that we cannot account for absolutely everything. And in this particular case, we're talking about a $9 differential from what people thought they were going to be asking of taxpayers Monday night. I don't think that that is going to be a tremendous burden while we wait for these houses to come back on the grand list.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Mr. Becker?
Thank you. I mean, it would seem to me, if we're talking about prior to October, the usual cycle to build one of these homes is somewhere around 4 to 6 months. Let's say even on the high side, 9 months, and then get the CO to put it up on the market. So realistically, we're looking, a bunch of these houses, I bet you if you drove down the street here in, the beginning of May, they're pretty close to where they're probably going to come out and get their COs and then go to market, and therefore be back at that supplemental or full or realistically higher assessment rate. I mean, it's always a snapshot in time that's sort of trailing, but we're looking into all of our projections for next year. So it wouldn't surprise me if these homes are actually, if that number, when you come 6 months from now and you come and you look, that number is even higher than where it was when we were doing the budgeting. So I guess on my end, a lot of what we're going to do tonight in setting this mill is projecting, and yeah, there's targets, and I share a lot of the frustration about that, but to some extent, to me, it looks like this mill assumption maybe could come down a little bit, and it's actually probably going to be more than compensated. And we're not talking in a year or something to that effect. We're talking probably in the next few months, possibly before the budget even kicks into effect. That's what I'm seeing. I mean, somebody correct me if I'm a little bit wrong there, but
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Becker. These are all very good points all around. I think the bottom line frustration is that we did have a known adjustment that was known by the Finance Office just after our vote, but could have been available to the RTM should that have a bearing on their vote. But at the very least, they probably should have been notified. And to be fair, we don't know whether they were or weren't. They weren't by you.
Correct.
But we don't know whether they were by someone else.
Correct.
Mrs. Albin raises a valid point. Mr. Becker raises a valid point. I'll go to Mr. Walsh, and then I want to wrap this up, and we can continue and discuss what our options are.
Well, the
Mr.
interesting thing is
Walsh.
going to be is, and Ms. Albin kind of brought it up, is you just don't know what's going to happen with down at that beach area with so many. And what scares me is that there's a lot of developers who bought some of these properties because, as she said, it was more advantageous for them to take the insurance money, sell the property, and leave without rebuilding. Is that there could be a lot more kids coming into the system down at the Sherman area with all these kids, because all these houses are going to be built much bigger. And some of these people, if you just go down at the bottom of Lally, some of the other streets down there, you'll see some of the smaller houses that are being taken and demolished and whatever, and they're going to be replaced by some of these much larger 4 or 5 bedroom houses that are going to be sold to people with a lot more children. So we could be starting to see some variances down there based on that, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
So
Another
it comes
valid
with an
point.
expense as well.
Yeah.
Not just an increase in taxes.
Thank you.
I'm going to respond to a question to the CFO by the chair. offline. If I'm going to jump ahead to Schedule K. We can come back to the rest, or we can just go to K and make a decision.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead.
As you can see, this is a schedule of summary of options, if you will, which has uncollected percents ranging from 98.91% down to 98.59%. You can see to get the equivalent 1.96%, that was the expectation of the members of the RTM when that evening was finished, would require a change in the uncollected rate from 98.71% to 98.79%.
And how do you feel about that 98.79% collection rate? And I have the tax collector here as well.
The 98.71% is a number that's in a range, kind of like a midpoint of a range, that this 79 is within that range as well.
So you would be, I don't want to put words in the tax collector's mouth or your mouth, but you would be okay if we went up to that 98.79?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is refer the board now to Schedule I. I get my I's and L's mixed up.
You didn't say yes or no.
No, but I didn't. Schedule I is a summary of the Schedule D through whatever. And we can go, basically, these numbers are all in some of these other schedules in greater detail, but this is the summary of what I'm just getting ready to go through. We have, based upon the final state budget, we have an increased state revenue of $54,000. Senior tax relief that's in to date, plus some projection for future claims to be filed, but the end date is May 15th. We're anticipating a savings of $28,000. Assessment appeals and overpayments, we have a negative $139,000. And then an interesting number that I think you might want to look at the schedule specifically is the FEMA reserve, which is the next previous schedule, Schedule H. Our total billable, this is for non-capital items, our total billable to FEMA was $3,134,000. The receivables are, the two major ones, are the two receivables has been established are for project work orders 473 and 663. So you can see that we've established a receivable that's $514,000 less than what we've billed. Non-billable expenses, one of the items actually, which is the further Witt O'Brien activity related to non-structural items, non-capital items, which are not billable, which is one of the reasons that we set up the reserve, is given information current to period to date, event to date, plus projected of about $175 million. I spoke with the Witt O'Brien people today regarding the processing and status of 473 and 663. 473 is in the hands with everything in the hands of FEMA, finalized. 663 will be in the hands of FEMA, finalized in a couple of weeks. Based upon the preliminary analysis, he being the FEMA representatives, is expecting limited change. So we may have a reserve positive here with the FEMA residuals that would flow into the general fund of $300,000. So given that the 9879 is in the range, given that the sum of these numbers is a net positive, close to $300,000. My answer to your question is yes.
Okay. The question was, the question very simple, the question very simply was, if you look at page, my question to Mr. Mayor was, in the calculation that was before us, that's been consistent, going back to my earlier question from earlier this evening, they lowered the collection rate, okay? The anticipated collection rate to 98.71. This present year, it's at 98.75.
Last year.
The current year we're in. For next year, okay?
We don't know the current year we're in yet, because...
The current
it's
year
not over.
we're in was budgeted at 98.75.
Yes, sir, budgeted at, yes,
Right.
sir.
So then, what was projected to be budgeted for next year is 98.71. At that 98.71, with the new information in the grand list, the anticipated tax increase would have been in the 2.05 range, the mill rate increase. If we raise the collection rate to 98.79, it mitigates that and brings it back down to the 1.96. So my question to the tax collector and Mr. Mayor was, are you comfortable with us raising the collection rate to the higher 98.79 to mitigate the loss in the assessment value? His long-winded but excellent response was yes. The tax collector hasn't opined yet. Yes. Therefore, if we assumed a higher tax collection rate, we could maintain the 1.96 approved tax increase, or approved percentage increase, and the mill rate would have to be 24.4, and that's what we would be approving.
Correct.
Questions on this from anyone? Mr. Brockfeld?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, thank you to both of you. I mean, I understand obviously the math and what you're describing. I guess
Why is it obvious?
I'm sorry? Oh, thank you. Well, it may not be after I finish my statement. Let me put my glasses on so I can see you as I talk to you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Yeah, you and Rick Perry.
Thank you.
That might not be an upside.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have a few philosophical problems with this, where we're headed, okay? One is, are you comfortable with the tax collection rate at 98.79 versus 7.1, knowing obviously there's a guess factor in this no matter what number we use? Are you comfortable with it because you're comfortable that's what we'll collect, or because you gave a very eloquent answer as to why we can get away with it, so to speak, because there's a couple $100,000 of potential positive variance here that could, you know, fill the gap if necessary, if I heard you correctly?
This is both art and science. The 98.79 is within the range. And the answer is yes.
Okay. Let me ask.
Both reasons.
Yeah. Could you have, obviously, we don't know what the tax collection rate is as we speak this year. Do you have the actual tax collection rate over the last couple of years that we could compare that to the numbers that we're contemplating here tonight?
Yeah, there's a,
I got you, Mr. Dwight.
Is that because he's going to answer it?
the answer is yes, and the answer is no. Because the history of the tax collections rate is not super clear for the following reason. There is a budget number that's put, because A, the documentation doesn't exist, and that's why we've developed all this paperwork, so that there's a real trail going forward. There's two tax collection rates, actually. I'm sorry you asked the question.
Yeah.
And so will you be when I get done.
I think Mr. Dwight was going to answer.
The grand list, as I indicated earlier, changes. So if you look at the grand list number that goes into the budget process is grand list number A. Then you have grand list number B, which is after the BAA approvals, and then you have grand list C for whatever reason. There's a difference, for example, between the last year's grand list and at the end of March, and the grand list in June that was used when the tax collector loaded her taxes to get a receivable of about, I think it was $9 million. Okay, less. So if you apply the collection, the total collections to the the gross receivable in the tax collector's office, you'll get one number. If you apply the total collections to the grand list, to the total anticipated by the grand list, you'd get a different number. Because your numerator is different.
Okay. Can we defer to Mr. DeWitt for a second?
Please, Mr. DeWitt?
Unlike our CFO, I have a number. So the night, March 20th, when our esteemed tax collector was here, we asked the question, and Cinda's answer was 98.76. At this, the collection rate at this point in the budget.
As of March 20th.
I don't know who else would have told us it was 320. That was tax collector evening.
Come on up.
Okay, are you asking what the collection rate is right now with what we've collected?
I'm saying the night on March 20th, I think we asked you, what was the collection rate right now?
On March 20th, it would not have been 98%, because we had not had our April collection yet.
Let's ask what the number
Okay, well
is
then let's
now.
ask what it is now.
It's about 95.58.
Yeah, 95.58% of the adjusted collectible has been collected.
Where were we at the same point last year?
I don't know who gave me that number.
I think that might be what we budgeted, Chris, for the tax collection rate to be this year.
My note literally says. Collection rate
Okay.
at this point for the budget,
Okay,
98.76.
go ahead.
Okay. This year, on April 31st, 2014, we had collected 95.54% of the adjusted collectible. Last year, on April 30th, we had collected 95.10% of the collected.
Where did we end the year? Last year, I know you don't know this year.
Oh, where we ended the year on the adjusted collectible was
For that.
98.79% in my office.
So we're right within spitting distance, which is why you say you're comfortable with this rate for next year.
Mhm.
And that's the net, you're very specific in your terminology, and your terminology is because that collection, that collectible, changes based on the ins and outs, to Mr. Mayor's point, of how the grand list ebbs and flows. So that ends up being the true collectible rate of the specific grand list for that year,
Correct.
which will be a different grand list moving forward as it ebbs and flows again.
Every month it changes.
Right. Does that answer your question, Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, and
Go ahead. And I'll come back to you.
And because we think the number will start going back up maybe in the next year, gives me a little more confidence that we could go to the higher collection rate. So that number, because of that 200 and, I have a mental block with that, 127, right? I feel better about going to a higher collection rate based on that number predicting to go the right way.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Brockfeld, and then I'll go to Mrs. Alvin.
Let me sum it up in a non-math way, what I guess I'm trying to say, which is that I guess at the end of the day, what I'm a little concerned about here is what we're obviously doing, which is trying to plug a number to get to some result that optically looks good or matches what the RTM intended or whatever it is. And, you know, the truth is that if the budget had been brought before me with a 98.79% number, I wouldn't have said boo. right? Because everything everybody has said makes sense. But I was brought a number of 98.71% because I've come to trust the CFO and his office that they seem to be doing a great job in bringing all these numbers before us. And I think that there are repercussions to actions that are taken by various boards and our town government. And if the Board of Assessment Appeals decided that the property should be appraised in a different way, and it's unfortunate the timing, and I think it's a reasonable point going forward that it could be better communicated to us and to RTM. I think that's a very valid point, which I think is Mr. Walsh's point from 45 minutes ago. Then, I mean, I'm not going down with the ship on this one. I just want to make people understand. I'm not really arguing about the number. I mean, unless we got crazy and made it, 99.5. But I'm just saying that I think Ms. Albin said it best. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is $9 per household. And so what we, at least be honest with ourselves, this is about making a number that's below 2% rather than above 2%. And I think there's an integrity issue. That's a bad word, because everybody here has tremendous integrity. I think there's a question as to why we're trying to, what are we trying to do here, is my question.
I'll go to Mrs. Albin, then I'll respond for myself personally after she has her opportunity.
Listening to both the tax collector and the CFO and just everything that we've been saying here, I would be, so in the interest of art, I would be more comfortable at 98.75. We haven't talked about that number. It sits in the middle of the two we're considering. If the art is at play, in addition to the science, I would be a bit more conservative to just be a little safer, because there are a lot of unpredictables in a fiscal year. We've seen that this year, and it just might be the slightest little buffer that, with those unpredictables that pop up, would provide the funds that we might need to help us out of those issues. We struggled with one this year that happened on the school side. We've had all kinds of issues over the years. I'm just more comfortable in the middle ground.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Does anybody else have a comment? Mr. DeWitt, please. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To respond to Mr. Brockfeld's comments, I, for one, have never been about a bottom line number. Getting below 2%, I'm not there. But the point that makes me want to change this number is the point that Mr. Walsh brought up. This $224,000, $223,000 is burden that every taxpayer will take, $5 a household, $10 a household, I really don't care what it is, for a short-term interim problem that is no one's problem. It's a Sandy problem, right? So my reasoning for moving the number to 98.79 is that it doesn't seem, well, first off, our CFO and our tax collector both say they're comfortable with it. Two, it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility. I mean, numbers we've talked about in the past, right? And Mrs. Albin's point about the starting 98.71, our CFO has mentioned this many times since he's been CFO. That's a target. We start with a number. It is just math. We start with a number because we got to multiply everything times something. And when we get to this date, we say, what do you think, Cinda? What do you think, Bob? And we move forward. So believe me, getting under 2%, not a big concern of mine. I think making up that little bit of money, that 4/10 or 8/10 of a percent, 8/100 of a percent, are going to make up, per Mr. Walsh's point, is the reason that I would be an advocate of changing that.
Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
Just to continue on there, I mean, I'm comfortable again at the 24.4, and I think for all the reasons that were just mentioned, but also if you go back to my earlier thoughts about where this is actually going to tick upwards, probably very soon, crossing over, not halfway through the year or in some other year, but with the construction probably coming to an end very soon, you're actually Add that to it, and I'm even more comfortable. So I think the CFO brought some points up. We brought some. We're not saying to take both of them and go down to 2438 or something to that effect. We're saying kind of find the middle of all of that, which is the 24.4. And I think that to me is a comfortable number for those reasons. And I can certainly sleep at night knowing I've taken some of, but not all of those factors to still keep it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Go to Mr. Mayor, because he had a question.
Just a couple very quick things. Number one, the 98.71 was selected in November. I could not, and was used today for consistency. I could not tell you that I would still pick that number if I was picking a new number today. It might just as easily be 98.79. As Ms. Booker stated, and I stated, I think we're both comfortable with the number.
I want to go for myself, because I said I would respond. Your point's well taken, Mr. Brockfield. To be honest, I remember talking about this number. The guy asked a question on this number back in March when we first started as to what the number was. And I think I commented at the time that that seemed low to me given where we came in prior years. Tonight I heard two pieces of information. And by the way, as I walked in the door, this was the conversation I was expecting having, right, was about the collection rate, because it's a conversation we've had several times in previous years, both with yourself and with your predecessor, right? And a couple things on this. Number one, we're ahead of where we were last year at this time. Number two, the last year tax collection rate came in exactly at the 98.79, right? So to your point, it was within the range. To your point, your 98.71 was picked because you had to pick a number back in October. And you picked a conservative number, and I don't blame you at all, and you've maintained that conservative number all the way up till tonight. And tonight you've delivered the news that here's an acceptable range, do as you what. Now there's some symmetry to the fact that we've got a problem on the assessment side, and that this helps cover that problem. And I'll happily take advantage of that. But I was going to look at this tax rate anyway and propose that we adjust it downwards if the facts were as the facts are. And that turns out to be the case, yes?
Correct.
That's where I am. It's a happy coincidence, and I'm very happy about it, yeah.
I'm glad you're happy.
Yeah.
There's still more tax appeals, though, right? Is everything, not everything?
Yes, there's still more tax appeals, and they are estimated and included in the calculation.
Okay.
Not only are they estimated and included, but there's also going to be an ebb and flow up and down on the other items. Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Mayor, do we have an estimate for the current year on whether we're going to project a surplus at this point in time?
We'll certainly know that on Tuesday. I think the answer is yes.
Any potential ranges we're looking at since you're working on the numbers now?
No, I mean, it's the confluence of all the activity going on right now. You know, it's all happening together, but nothing's been pulled together. But it looks, I think yes. I mean, I don't think it's going to be gigantic. I mean, there's some negatives, there's some positives.
It's got to be the number of that half storm we never.
Well, it just makes me feel a little better.
I mean, DPW actually I think is
it
going to
makes
come
me
in
feel a little better
less,
adding to
a little
what our
worse,
chairman
even though
said,
we
that
storm.
with the thought that there, even if it's a little bit, it's not going to be the other way. It's not going to be a negative number. We're adding $500,000 into this budget to go to our fund balance. It sounds as though we're not going to be losing by the end of the year on that.
And we don't need the $500,000 for the school because they've come down to $100,000.
Yes.
Right.
So numbers seem to be playing into, and I would agree with the chairman, then that it seems to be, the stars seem to be aligned to go up to the
98.79, yeah. Thanks. Anybody else? I think we're all talked out. With that, I'll make the motion myself. And the motion I would make is that we set the mill rate for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2014, and ending June 30th, 2015, at 24.4. That mill rate would result in a tax rate increase of 1.96 and assumes a collection rate of 98.79%. Do I have a second to my motion? I have a second from Mr. Brockville. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? The mill rate for the town is set. Thank you for a very deliberative discussion, a very informative discussion. I know it took some time, but I thought it was extremely worthwhile. Mr. Mayor, if we could ask your office to follow up with the Board of Assessment Appeals regarding those comments. I want to thank our tax collector for being here tonight and for your participation in our meeting. Thank you so much. Yes?
Yes.
You will do that. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that.
What-
And could you report back on that to the extent that you can next week with some documents and follow through? Commercial versus residential, what was at the beach? What's really driving that variance? And do we expect that to continue? Would be my question. Thank you.
Can we get the addresses? You know, a list, what the original tax was and what the appeal was, you know, the difference?
Can we do that?
I'm just curious.
Can we get a list of the addresses, what the original tax was and what the reassigned tax was? Our resident real estate expert is one.
I'd like to see it.
He's looking for target.
Thank you.
Trolling the houses.
Looking for listings.
Yes.
Anyone want to sell?
Mr. Walsh.
It might be, and if no one else wants to do it, I'm fine not doing it, but since the tax assessor wasn't here, it'd be interesting to get an analysis from the tax assessor about where that, you know, it sounds like it was based on what Mary found on the BAA's minutes, that a lot of the houses were in the beach area. But it would be interesting to get an analysis and the tax assessor to give us his opinion about how that all worked out and to confirm that, because we're all going forward thinking that right now.
You're right.
But maybe at the, if you could, even if we had him at the beginning of our next quarterly, just to have a brief analysis on it while it's still fresh on our minds.
If it's possible that we can get that done for next week's quarterly while it's fresh in our minds, that'd be great. If not, I still think it's a worthwhile exercise, and if for some reason he can't get it done by next week,
And my next,
I'd like to put it on the next one.
Next question, and maybe the tax assessor could explain this, is I understand the finance department got the numbers on April 8th. The question is, could we have gotten those numbers sooner before the Board of Finance voted? Since the BAA had already had their meeting, had made their changes, can we get the information sooner so that we all have as much information when we're voting on the budget as possible? And maybe the tax assessor can tell us what goes into preparing those numbers, how they go about figuring that out, about what that BAA adjustment's going to be.
Great. Agreed. And maybe, quite frankly, and I'm sorry, Mr. DeWitt, I saw your hand, I'll go back. Maybe if the answer is we couldn't get it before we vote, maybe the question becomes, is it possible for them to move their meeting earlier in March, considering it might be some part of our deliberations? And I don't know what their schedule is or something like that.
I think the dates are set by state statute, but I'm not certain.
Could we
But
check?
those are
And
those are
that's-
questions that are worthy of asking.
Thank you, and I'll go to Mr. DeWitt.
I just want to thank the CFO and his office. This is a great document. This is the first time I can recollect having a range of numbers that you could look through and say, we always get, a tenth of a mil is, you know, a number, right? So this is very informative, so thank you.
I can just feel the love here. There you go. All right. If there's nothing else on this topic, we'll go to item number 2. To appoint the auditors to conduct the audit of the town's financial records for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2014. I'm going to go right to Mrs. Leclerc. Go right ahead.
Me?
And use the microphone.
I don't know. I think it's really Bob that has to lead this one. We received we received an engagement letter from the current auditors, and I did have a couple questions before we appointed them, and that is, what did we budget to pay for them? Does it match what's in the audit letter, the engagement letter?
Yes.
Okay.
I say that like that. I specifically, personally did not compare, but I asked the controller, who is also the clerk of this board, to compare, and she reported to me that they matched.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Does anybody have any comments on our audit firm or any concerns or questions that they have on reappointing them for the next fiscal year audit? Seeing none, Mrs. Leclerc, would you like to make the motion?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion that we appoint for our audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2014, to hire Cohen and Resnick as per their engagement letter.
Do I have a second for that motion? We'll go with Mr. Brockfeld. Do we have any other questions, comments from board members? Anything from the public? Seeing none. All in favor of appointing Cohen Resnick to do the audit for the year ending June 30th, 2014? Those opposed? Abstentions? That item carries unanimously. Okay, item number 3. Thank you, Mrs. Leclerc, and thanks to the Audit Committee for their continued good work. Item number 3 is to appoint the clerk for the Board of Finance for the next year ending May 2015. You'll recall this item was added when we had that bit of a hubbub over who controls the appointment of our clerk, and we had decided at that time that it would be appropriate to do a reappointment each year after the budget process, so that it was top of mind and that we had an opportunity to review the situation. My strong preference would be to reappoint Caitlin Bossy, the controller of the town.
Could we go into executive session for like 5 minutes?
Sure. Let me make this, and then we can second it, and then if you want to go into executive session. For the good work she's done this past year, I've worked with her very closely, as with other members of the board, as with the CFO, and she's done fine work for us for the last year and a half. I would make the motion to reappoint her. Do we have a second to that? Second with Mr. DeWitt, and then we have a motion for you?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Before you accept Mr. Stone's motion, I'd just like to say that I heartily support your motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second to go into private executive session for Mr. Stone? He asked to go into private executive session. Second? Okay. All in favor of a quick private executive session? Sure. Those opposed? Abstentions? Let's go out back for a couple minutes.
Can you tell us the reason why you're going in? I think you have to do that. I think you have to say why you're going in. If it's litigation,
This is
or if it's, it has to be more than that.
Has to be more than,
More than just,
Yeah.
like Bob asked.
yeah. It's a good that's a good point. Yeah, it's usually, we view this as a personnel matter.
As a personnel matter, okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted to check.
I thought that was self-evident, but thank you for the point.
All right.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, do I have a motion to come back out? Second, or first, do I have a second? Second, Mr. Stone. All in favor of coming out of private executive session? Those opposed? Okay, we have a motion on the table to reappoint Caitlin Bossy to be our town, to be our board clerk for the coming year through May of next year. Any other comments, questions, concerns by board members? Anything from the public? Seeing none, all in favor? Those opposed, abstentions, Ms. Bossy is reappointed. All right, thank you. So we have minutes to approve. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have the minutes of a budget hearing from February 18th, budget hearing from March 4th, budget hearing from March 6th, budget hearing from March 11th, budget hearing from March 13th, budget hearing March 18th, budget hearing March 20th. Can I have a motion to put these items before us? And I will call them individually in case people were absent on individual nights or don't want to vote. Well, we actually have, at the beginning of the minutes, there's actually the names, so you can go through them. Do I have a motion to put those before us? We'll have Mr. DeWitt. Do I have a second? Mr.
Second,
Becker?
But then on the minutes, I'm wondering if we can postpone these to the next meeting. They kind of, they arrived at the start of this week. They're lengthy. I've begun kind of reviewing them.
Okay,
on my
so-
end, it would seem like it'd be
Okay, do you want to make
worthwhile
a
for us
motion to do that?
I'd like to make a motion to postpone to our, would you do our quarterly or just our next regular?
Our quarterly is next week.
Yeah, is that, I'm okay with postponing to the quarterly meeting.
No,
then.
do it to the next one, because we
Next
usually
regular,
don't
you're
do
saying, right?
voting items. Right. So do you want to make the motion?
Yeah, I'll make the
Post
motion.
to the June meeting?
To the postpone to the June meeting.
Do I have a
Yes.
second? Second, Mrs. Albin. Any questions, comments, concerns from board members? Seeing none. All in favor of postponing to the June meeting? Those opposed? Those abstain? You all be happy to note, because you'll have a nice, quick meeting next week, I will not be present. I have a business meeting, business out of town, so Mr. Downtown Jimmy Brown will be chairing the meeting, and I'm sure you'll be out of here in about 20 minutes. Yes, Mr. DeWitt.
I will not be here either. I'll be on business travel as well.
Okay.
Uh-oh, you gonna have a quorum?
So we have 6, so there'll be at least 6 and maybe less next week for our quarterly meeting. I did ask, just so that you're aware, I did ask Dr. Tidal to come next time, not just to address where they are year-to-date, but also to discuss the very good news regarding the special education overage and the fact that they've been able to cover that. So he announced that at the Board of Education the other night, and he forwarded some documentation. So he'll be here along with his team to address it. Do I have a motion? To adjourn. With Mrs. Albin, do we have a second? Mr. DeWitt, all in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? Good evening. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.